Token Arthur was always curious about new things. One day, while flying over the jungle, he saw a group of animals exchanging goods and services using colorful stones. So he contacted Fintech CTOs from fantastic companies all around the world and collaborated with them to learn all about finance. Inspired, Arthur asked Insert CEO Vasil to help start a podcast to share their knowledge with the world. This is what you are watching right now, Fintech CTO Podcast. Enjoy.
Hello, fintech leaders and builders. I'm Vasil Solashuk from Insart, and this is our next episode of Fintech CTO Podcast. And here we uncover the truth about how to build great fintech products, companies, and teams. And today I am really very excited to have a conversation with the author of newly released book. And the title is Serverless as a Game Changer: How to Get the Most Out of the Cloud. And we will certainly unpack all the major concepts of it today. And I would like to welcome Joe Emison, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Branch. Hello, Joe.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Joe Emison is co-founder and CTO at Branch Insurance. Branch is here to put an end to the madness. Founded by a mix of insurance and technology vets, this company is the first one built to optimize the process of bundling home and auto insurance, offering simple ways to mobilize communities of members, leveraging the benefits of scale to constantly lower premiums, streamlining to claim process, and working to enrich the communities it serves. Branch is getting us back to getting each other's back.
Yeah, thank you for joining. And Joe, as I know, you are not the first-time co-founder, technical co-founder. So can you tell us what other companies have you co-founded before and why?
Sure. Well, I founded a software company that makes software for building departments called Blueprints, a company that is in commercial real estate and has helped tenant rep brokers. This is software as a service. Tenant rep brokers help tenants in offices find their space. I founded a company that was that did a lot of games in the late 90s, and BuildFacts, a company that aggregates all the building permit data in the U.S. And sells them largely to hedge funds and insurance companies. And so now Branch, which is a personal lines insurance company.
So as I see, you have a pretty great track record co-founding companies in different business areas, in different industries. And here we actually discuss more things related to fintech. So, how did you actually come up with becoming a technical co-founder for Branch? Was it intentional to join the fintech company? So what's your story here?
Yeah, I meet a lot of people, have done a lot of joint ventures and partnerships, and one of the sales I did that then led to joint venture with BuildFacts, this company that collected all the building permits in the U.S., was with my current co-founder in Branch. His name is Steve Lekis, and he's a lifetime in insurance at Allstate, at Esurance, and then at a public company called Verisk that sells a lot of data to insurance companies. And so Steve came to me and asked, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a company, but I need a technical co-founder. Would you be interested?" And that is how most of my companies have either started as somebody reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, would you found this with me?" or where it had been more mutual. You know, I've reached out and said, "Hey, I've got this idea. Why don't we do this?" And have paired up with someone. Usually that person's the CEO and I'm the CTO.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. So look, so there are lots of viewers actually who are considering becoming the technical co-founders. And can you tell us, like, maybe there are some tips and tricks, like how to expose yourself, maybe to your connections, to the public, so that you can have some kind of offering that like you had before with your co-founder?
I certainly think today it's so easy and cheap to build things technically that there's really, if your interest is in being a technical co-founder, I think there's really nothing stopping you from building something and making connections in that space. And so if I were in a position where I wanted to be a fintech CTO or a fintech co-founder, and I wasn't quite sure, could I find someone else out there? I think I might actually start by looking at being maybe a founding engineer at a very early stage fintech company. And there are these co-founder dating sites, but I tend to think it works better organically if you just build something. So, I mean, one of the things I might do if I just said I want to be in fintech and I want to be, founding team, I'd be tempted to go someplace where there is a lot of fintech activity, maybe, building something that works on Ramp or Rippling or, some company that is established and is growing rapidly. And I'd look to do something in its ecosystem that I could build and be helpful with. And I would just keep leveraging that. I mean, in my experience, the thing that's most valued is that you can show you can build, and what you've built is something that's responsive to someone's
Joe,
actual pain point.
I don't hear you. So there is something with your sound. Looks like.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Okay, hang on. I don't. Well, I'm getting levels.
Now I can hear you.
Okay. It's getting like I didn't change anything. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I don't know either. But anyway, so
where do you want me to rewind to? The whole question?
Yeah. So actually, let's do it. Let's do it. So yeah, Joe. So what do you think? We have lots of viewers who actually consider becoming the technical co-founder, and are there any tips and tricks how to expose yourself to your connections, to you, maybe to the public, saying something like that? Okay, guys, I would like to become a technical co-founder. So, are there somebody out there looking for this type of person?
I think there are two paths here. One of them is if you have people coming to you and asking, "Would you be my technical co-founder?" then you already have a network and a pipeline. And what matters is evaluating, is this a good company to join or a good co-founder to join? I take your question more on the second one, which is I don't have people asking me to be a technical co-founder, but I'd like that. And if that's the answer, I think the most important thing is to put yourself out there. And given how cheap and easy it is to build things today, I would build things that get people's attention. So I would be tempted to look at growing companies like a Ramp and seek to build something in that space. There are plenty of users, find a problem, build something, and be known as someone in the space who has built something. I think that's the fastest path to getting on board as in a founding team, or getting known and getting approached as someone who can build things.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good advice here. And when you start a company as a technical co-founder, so you can actually have this journey from the very beginning. And at start, your CTO role is something, but right now it's something else. Okay, so can you tell us how your role as CTO evolved? What have you done like in the very first steps as a CTO, and what do you do right now?
Very first steps are figuring out how do you. Well, at every stage, it's how do I get to the company to the next stage? How am I spending 75% of my time on the thing that matters the most this week to keep this company going? And companies are very fragile at the beginning. And so it's really important to know, it may be the case that one day or 1 week, the most important thing you can do is clean the office because you've got people coming over that, need to see you in a certain light. We certainly at Branch had cases where companies would come and want to see our office on site and verify that it had like a shredder and a lockable door or things like that. So sometimes that was the job. I was also the first person working full time on software development. So I wrote a lot of the initial code at Branch. I did all of the systems architecture. And then over time, as the company is growing and needs different things to get to the next step, what you're trying to do is make sure that you're hiring and delegating the things that you really can't keep yourself. And in my opinion, still keeping all the things that aren't kind of a full person that you don't need to delegate. So for example, there are some, weird system configuration things that I still do because they're very small. There's no full-time person that I could hire to do it. And it just doesn't take that much time. And so I think, at some point in time, you want to make sure that everything you do is redundant. But in my experience, that's more like, 7 to 10 years after founding, at least in the companies that I've founded to date.
So, by the way, how many team members do you have in your team, just to set a perspective?
So I will take different departments at different times, just based upon, what makes the most sense for where my skills are. But I think today I have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 120 people in my organization.
Okay, so having 120 people, and you can actually have pretty complex processes in your department. And I have read that you, and I have seen that you actually started to write down lots of articles during the last, even like maybe 15 years or something, putting all your experience, how to manage this size of the teams. And eventually you ended up publishing the book.
Yes.
And the question is, so why exactly did you decide to write this book?
The result, every article that I've written and the book were the result of having conversations with people in person at conferences or sometimes on the internet, a lot of them on Twitter, where I was trying to explain my point of view about something and people weren't understanding it. And so so all of them are this attempt to explain in more detail and give more richness to this is no, I'm saying this. And so this book is really the culmination of I've been doing software development and architecture and managing teams who have been building things for more than 20 years. And I have a very specific perspective on how to do it cheaper, faster, better than how most people do it. So usually it's like cheaper, faster, better, pick two. I think the way we do things is cheaper, faster, and better.
Okay.
But a lot of people are highly skeptical about that. And so the goal with the book was to really lay down and address all of the objections that I had heard to date. And also I wrote it and sent it out to a lot of people and had them reflect on it. And then I answered those objections that they had, a lot of times just explaining more because I wasn't sure which things people would sort of say, no, I don't believe that, or have objections in other ways.
Yeah, so also when we first met with you, you told me that there are, some arrogant senior developers who like to do things in their own way and not explaining what exactly they have done, but they actually need to build for future. And I really liked your idea that if you're a senior engineer, you shouldn't just think about yourself, but you for sure need to think about your team and about your future team members who will be actually maintaining and developing the whole product themselves going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of organizations don't ask what is the driving goal in terms of how we think about developing software. And for us, we're optimizing for maintainability. So this concept that you talked about, which is how do we make sure that the next people the next developers, the average developer, can work on the code and understand the code base. This is often talked about as you should program like the next programmer who would work on your code is holding a gun to your head. And I mean, I don't necessarily love that analogy, but I think that image is not dissimilar to what we're looking for. And another challenge that certainly I run into and we see a lot is there is this belief in software development that it doesn't matter what tools you use. Like, you just use the stack, and launch the stack, and focus on the customer, and don't think about, don't worry too much about exactly the stack. You can always rewrite it. You can always rebuild it. I love aspects of what's behind that. I love, not gatekeeping and thinking, like let's not make everybody learn the new hot thing all the time. But I also think it's highly unlikely, just like it's probably not the best successor to the CEO of the company to pick the CEO's child. In that same way, it's probably not the optimal stack to build a new thing, to use this thing you've been using elsewhere that is, that you might have started working with and using this way 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's probably not the optimal choice if your goal is to scale this, delegate to lots of other developers, build up a larger organization. I think if you're going to be a solo developer and build, small products that don't require a lot of other developers, do whatever you want. Do what you like. That should be part of what you're choosing. But if the goal is we're going to go build something big and we're going to have a lot of developers, it's really worth asking what stack should we use? What tools should we use? And what's going to be most optimal? And it's just silly to me that so many people don't think about that at all, or they come up with rationalizations for, we're just going to use this thing that I know, whoever the co-founder is or the first technical lead.
I really like how you start the book, actually setting the right mindset. What exactly is serverless? And it appears to be like the serverless mindset appears to be something that allow modern development teams to deliver business value faster, as you said, more secure, with less technical depth. Can you unpack a little bit more? So why exactly? So what are the main principles of this serverless approach that you describe in your book?
My simplest version of it is, it's not my uptime. My goal, and the way I like to think about serverless, is we're going to build, we're going to deploy, and we're going to be responsible for the bugs that we generate, and we're going to fix them. But anything that involves running a server, patching software, capacity management, any of those things, we're going to delegate out to managed service providers. That's the simplest, most straightforward definition I have. And in the book, I give two other definitions. One of them is to think about, you should really only be building the things that make your business different. That's the Ben Kehoe sensibility. And then there's also sort of a criteria that a lot of people who use serverless solutions give, which is it should scale to zero, meaning if you're not using it, you don't pay for it. You should pay for it only in proportion to use of it. And you shouldn't need to do any of these sort of maintenance items on it. And in the end, all of these serverless products these serverless managed services have to be multi-tenant. There's none of these are single. As soon as you get in any single tenant world, you're having to manage that separately. You're taking on some sort of operational burden. So there is a real mind shift. There are lots of things that people don't like about single tenancy or don't like about multi-tenancy. There are a lot of things that people don't like about, wait, I'm dependent on somebody else for uptime. There's a lot of things that people don't like about those, but I like those definitions to bring those issues to the forefront, because that's where the conversation often has to start, especially with people who have been developing software and been CTOs or VP engineering for a long time. Those are the things they're most likely to be very upset about.
So in your book, you also talk about the innovation and how would you define what is innovation? And also, can you tell us, so you mentioned that innovation sometimes is a choice what you shouldn't build rather than what you should build.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing if you're thinking about innovation is to first start with a problem that people that is out there, people actually have, that is not well solved. And then your innovation is going to be around how you're solving that problem. There are lots of technical people, senior technical people, who want to just sort of define innovation by let's do something really hard technically, or something that they find really hard technically. Most of these hard technical problems, especially in building software to be used by lots of people, most of these hard technical problems have been solved. Not all of them. There's obviously, and there's always interesting new ones that people are finding. But to us, and in any organization I have, I really want to distinguish between our innovation is how we solve problems for customers, for partners, as opposed to our innovation is we did this hard technical thing. And in fact, the hard technical thing that I like to focus on doing is how do we buy things and use managed services so that so our focus can be so maniacal on the problem we're solving. And one of the ways that I like to measure this is ask what percentage of your developers are working on front end interfaces. And I think ideally it should be the majority. The majority of development effort should be building interfaces. Interfaces are always really important to whatever you're building. And so you should be spending a lot of time and effort on them. And I think the more developer or technical effort you're spending on backends like Kubernetes and, having these platform teams, I think the more time and effort you're spending on those, that is largely, most likely undifferentiated, and could be, if you had architected differently, could be handled by a managed service provider at a much lower cost and much lower risk. And I think as those are things where when people want to hold those up as innovation, I get very chafe at that, at what they're saying, and I don't like it at all.
So would you say that your source code is an asset or liability based on your concept?
Yeah, all code is a liability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, you have to maintain it. So if I can build a unique, if we look at two different businesses, okay, and they're both solving the same problem for the same people, and one of them has 100 lines of code and one of them has 10 million lines of code, well, you'd much rather be with the 100 lines of code. I mean, that's a much easier to maintain, much easier to use, much easier to staff. You're going to spend a lot less money on the people. And the fact that it's possible with that smaller number of lines of code means that the other company just has these 10 million lines of liability. And I will tell you, with the company with the 100 lines of code, they're going to be able to innovate much more quickly, right? And if there's something that both of them need to build as a feature, it's going to be much faster to build that if there's so little existing code in other services. Now, look, there are exceptions to this, right? You could imagine that this case where some feature needs to be built and it's really big and difficult, and the 10 million lines of code is wonderfully done, and you could build this new feature so easily because of everything that's in that code. But as a practical matter, that doesn't happen. I've been a consulting CIO and CTO to many organizations. Every organization that I go to that has, 5+ million lines of code in a particular product, there isn't anybody on that team who isn't saying this has got tons of technical debt, it's got tons of poor decisions, and we have to spend millions to fix it. And by the way, we can't do any new development while that's happening. But we can't even do any new development anyway because it's so hard to work with the code base. So there is certainly a reality that as the code base gets bigger and bigger, it gets harder and harder to work with, again, for a particular function. And so the trick is, how do you get there? Now, Branch doesn't have 100 lines of code. Branch is in the, low 100,000 low hundred thousands of lines of code, but the equivalent company that I would have had to build 10 years prior would be in the millions of lines of code because there just weren't all of these services to leverage. And I will tell you, Branch is a much more nimble and capable and cheaper to run company from a dev side for its use of all of these serverless solutions and managed services.
Yeah, so it appears to be that to keep up with innovation, you actually need to have some simplest way to maintain your source code, and you can apply serverless approach to do that. And also, so my question here is to follow up on this. So you spent some time in related to construction industry, so you have seen how the construction projects are done, and sometimes the construction projects, they are compared to software development projects. So sometimes we look at similarities, but definitely they are different. So can you unpack a little bit? So what is different in software development projects? Because again, construction projects, they produce buildings which are considered as an asset. So software development projects, they produce a product and a source code actually, and source code is considered as a liability. So what's the difference?
Sure. Well, I think one really useful way to think about the difference is to think about spend and malleability. So let's start there. So a construction project is a massive capital expense, and then afterward has a much lower ongoing cost to maintain. And you can't change it very much, right? You can't change a skyscraper, very easily into, I don't know, like, a 4-story hospital that takes up a lot more, area. Software in general, the spend just tends to increase over time. So if it's a product that's being supported and is growing or even flat, but growing in terms of the revenue or its users, more money is being spent every successive year on managing it, maintaining it, building new features. This is especially true in software as a service. And I think one of the reasons why we moved from buy a piece of software and then buy the new version of it every year to software as a service, in addition to web delivery, is that we just have expectations as customers that we're going to buy something that solves kind of a problem for us, and it's going to get better over time. We're paying a subscription, and we get the bug fixes and we get new features, right? And maybe we get price increases on this too, but it's sort of this categorical problem solving. So whenever people analogize software to buildings, most of the time they're having this view of, we're going to spend all this money up front, and then we're going to have this maintenance cost. And this, I've seen this over the past 20 years in terms of capitalization of software development. Really common to say, oh, well, we're building this new product, and so we're going to spend all this money on it, and then we're going to capitalize it and spread that out, and then we're going to somehow, I don't know, get rid of all the software developers that know it really well and spend less on it. That never happens realistically, because that's not how it works. And it's not how the income for it works, and it's not how lots of things work. But there's still lots of companies trying to capitalize this software development. I'm very opposed to that, because what I see is when you build software products, they're popular, and you continue to spend more on them every year in order to build more and support them and manage your growing user base. So when you are building, so then let's talk about very much at the heart of your question, the asset versus liability. So when you build the building, you have the physical building. You have the land it's on. They're both assets, and you sell them to people, and they can do other things with them. When you sell software, generally speaking, nobody values the code itself. They don't. What do they value? When somebody buys a software company, or they buy an asset that's software from a company, what are they buying? They're buying the revenue stream and the customers who are of a certain type. So when people buy software assets, they are buying, I want to own these people who have this problem that is solved by this thing. And in fact, if you replaced, like, we could take something, take software. This is happening a lot in AI right now. Like if you had built up, 500,000 lines of code around chat with your PDF, right? Based upon, and maybe you built this on an LLM, open source LLM, like a year ago, right? But now the latest OpenAI ChatGPT things are out, and you realize you can replace this with just calls to ChatGPT. And you say, this is going to make a lot more sense, a lot easier. I'm going to do it that way. If you replace that out, you went from your, 500,000 lines of code to like 100 lines of code, and you kept selling to the same customers and had the same experience, they're not going to care. You haven't changed. You don't really changed the asset there. I mean, OpenAI might have changed the value of the asset by the fact that other people can copy you really easily, but nobody cared. But a building is very different. You can't just swap out. I mean, if a building were valued at, and some buildings are valued at the revenue stream of the tenants in them, but they're more valued at, like, this is what we think we can do right with this building, and it has these architectural features, and every part of, or so many parts of that building are very visible. Whereas when it comes to software, the only thing that's visible is the interface, and that's usually just, I mean, it's not any code actually. It's HTML and CSS. I mean, we can call those code, but it's not, those aren't the things that tend to be the most bloated, terrible parts of our code bases.
Yeah, so the user experience is something that is actually visible for all types of users that you have for your system. But for sure, behind the scene, there are lots of things going on. And yeah, so I agree with you, like the totally different economics of the project, software development project. And I think that this is also a trap to think about the software as something that you can build once, and you don't need to maintain it. So you need to maintain it, and you need to plan in advance. And it looks like you suggest an action plan how to do this. But let's talk about a little bit about the organizational design, because this is something that you touch in your book as well. And let's just remind ourselves the Conway's law, which actually states that organizations which design systems and software as a system are constrained to produce designs or architecture which is actually a copy of the organizational structure and communications in this organization. So how would you apply this Conway's law to serverless mindset?
I think it's true, and it generally exists. I think that one of the magic parts about having a serverless mindset is that Conway's law tends to affect you less because your organizations are smaller. You have fewer people in-house. So one good example of this is, I can take Branch specifically. So we, as far as I know, we're one of the very few insurance companies started in the last 10 years that didn't build its own in-house rater. So a big part of insurance is calculating the price, and the pricing algorithms are very complicated, especially in the United States in auto insurance. And so we use a service called Clarion Door, where we can send them a packet of information, and then they send us back a price. And then we have a team of people who configure that. So you kind of load up a bunch of configuration and files into Clarion Door, and then it has an API that our developers just send sort of a packet of information, like a couple hundred data points, and then it goes and generates a price and sends back the price. So this is what we this is how we operate. Everyone else, though, as far as I know, has built the rater. So what happens is, if you have developers who build the rater, you're going to have a team of 5+ PM, as well, maybe a product owner that's had to define it and test it and work with that. And then that's part of the org. Yes. And so every time anything else needs to be done, around the radar or that might touch the radar. Is this tied to the radar? And there are lots of things that it's not clear. Well, should that be in the radar? Should that not be in the radar? That is a team that when anything's getting built is going to kind of influence and slow down, have friction, and is going to have these sort of replicas of them in everything that happens in the company. But as soon as you say, no, we're just going to use an API for that, you no longer have that issue. It's not in the org chart. And in fact, the developers have such little interaction. It's probably like 100 lines of code that's like talking to that service. And then the team that loads it are not developers. They're on our insurance product team, and they're the rate team. And so that is a function, but you need that in insurance, people who are determining the prices. And that's it. So we've managed to not have an undifferentiated group of people in the organization. And that's what I would say that serverless does, is it allows you to, instead of having teams of people who do things that then become this sort of indelible thing that every time you make anything, their presence is part of it, you just don't have them. And so you're much leaner, much more efficient. And so when we build things, and so our development team at Branch is every developer is a developer. We don't have front end, we don't have back end, right? Everyone ends up being full stack because of serverless. And we hire mostly juniors. More than half of our developers, this was their first development job. So it's not about, this isn't like, oh, we're finding these magical full stack developers. And so we're able to have this incredibly simple organization that doesn't have the sort of Conway pain in the same way other companies do. But I think every organization will exactly follow Conway's law and will do that. And so the trick is, how do you make your organization more, how do you make it so that it's simpler, doesn't have all these pockets, so that you don't keep building these complex things?
So taking this into account, this approach with hiring, and when you define your engineering strategy, what do you think goes first? Designing the architecture, designing the software architecture, or designing the team toponymy?
Oh, design the architecture. So I'm a big believer, and this is, I think, very much in the serverless mindset, is you're looking at what you need to build, and you're doing two things. One is you're saying anything that's kind of large, and let's call large like anything that would take more than 3 or more months to build. Anything that's large, have humility that however you're going to build it initially isn't going to be right. And so the most important thing you can do is just get something out there to learn more, so that you can get to a point very quickly where you know what the right thing to have is. And the best way to do that is usually, if it's big, is to find some piece of software as a service that sort of does kind of what you want, customize it a bit, throw it into production, see what happens, and then you can adjust. And then if you say, okay, we need to build this custom because this software as a service doesn't let you do enough with it, that's great, but go gather all the information you can first, do things manually, build kind of interesting like API-based workarounds just to learn. So that's one thing you can do. And the second thing in the serverless mindset is just try not to build this code, try not to write this code that is all liability. So using software as a service, or leveraging libraries, or leveraging APIs. So if you keep doing this and you iterate into this, one, you don't need as many developers. You probably need a bigger budget for services, but what you'll spend on services is always way less than you'll spend on people and developers, way less. And then in terms of a team topology, or sort of how we think about teams, we're regularly changing that. So we believe in, we do retros every other week, and then we sort of ask at almost at every retro, although probably it's more frequently like every 3 to 6 months, making some pretty significant changes to say, why don't we try to do it this way, a little differently? And if every developer can work on every part of the code more or less, it's very easy to do that. You've got a lot of that flexibility built in.
So it looks like we can reverse the Conway's law using the serverless approach. And what I mean by that, so actually, if you already have an established team and organization toponymy, sometimes it's pretty difficult to reorganize. And if you have a big team and you have specific team toponymy and team structure, and you need to reorganize it because you don't like what is going on, and what is the outcome of the teamwork, what architecture you have as an outcome. Can we say that using serverless approach, it will be much easier to do restructuring of your team if you need to do this?
Well, if as part of the serverless, you have done what we have done, which is have everyone be able to work on anything. And the way we've done that is we've said most of what we need to build is front end. And so we hire front end developers, or we've trained up front end developers. And then we teach them what they need to know on the back end. And we use TypeScript in both. And so there isn't a need to learn a new language. And so if you know enough TypeScript to write, React front ends, then you know enough TypeScript to do a decent amount of back end. And then, we do have, not everyone who's worked at Branch is, started at Branch. So there is this level of learning you do when you build this back end code and business logic where over doing it over several years or many years, you learn more and more. And so you do want some of that experience. But if it's the same stack front end and back end, and we use AppSync, AWS AppSync we don't run a web server. We don't have virtual machines. We don't have containers, right? Everything is just functional code put up there, leveraging AppSync and these managed services. We use Vercel for front end hosting. It's very easy to onboard a developer in and then assign them to lots of different tasks that we do. So, we don't have a problem reorganizing the teams around different initiatives when we change priorities, because everyone basically can work on every part of the code.
Let's talk a little bit actually how would you define the problem that you solve at Branch? So what you build and why?
Yeah, so we at Branch, what we saw as the key opportunity was that it is really difficult to buy bundles of insurance. And so most people, if they go out in the US and they're trying to buy a home auto bundle, just a home policy and an auto policy, it can take hours. About the fastest you can get it done anywhere is probably 45 minutes to an hour. And you'll answer the same question multiple times. And it's just difficult. And so that process can't be embedded anywhere. That process, it's just too much work. And so as a result, most people don't shop frequently at all. So you get your home auto bundle and you basically keep it forever. The number one company in the space in terms of its market share is State Farm, and the average State Farm customer stays for 20 to 30 years. So they don't shop a lot. And so our belief was that we could serve this community a lot better and create more opportunities and make it easier for you to switch into a better product. And so the technology that we built that differentiates us is we can go from your name and address to you have a bindable price, like a price you can buy in 30 seconds. And then you can buy it right then. And so we've had people buy a home auto bundle in a minute or less than a minute. Most of the time, our home auto bundles are more like 5 or 6 minutes. But it's just a sea change. It's at least 10 times faster than anybody else. And so that creates a tremendous amount of opportunities. We convert leads better than anybody else for these bundles. And so we sell a lot more, we convert a lot better on leads, so we can pay more for leads. And we'll outperform, other people who are working with the same thing. So that's the core part of what we built at Branch and why technology was necessary. We had to build in this ability to do this name and address, to get a bindable price, and to buy the whole thing really quickly. And there isn't anybody else who has that technology. We're the only ones who have built it.
So in the book, I have read that at Branch, you have something like Branch primary development principle, which is actually when we write code, we optimize for maintainability. So is it something that you actually set from the very beginning, or it's a principle that evolved during the time?
From the very beginning. I mean, this is part of being the repeat technical co-founder is at a certain point, you get very convinced this is the right way to do this thing. And so I've been on optimized for maintainability. I think it first occurred to me in maybe 2012, 2013. And then I said, that's what we need to, because I was asking this question, you ask a lot in business, what are we optimizing for? And so I was asking it in software dev, and I said, what would make sense to optimize for? And I think maintainability is the right thing, because I built a lot of these companies and they just go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, right? And that technology, there's software that I last did any work on in like 2001, and it's still being used by 100,000 people and like on a weekly basis. And you just think like you want to make sure that people can work with that software.
Yeah, but when you start a new company, it's typically it can be not an easy way to and not an easy job to convince that we actually need to have this objective to optimize for maintainability, because from business perspective, like a business co-founder, they would prefer having some kind of MVP as fast as possible, go-to-market strategy, and not thinking about too much about the maintainability of the source code, because you even don't know whether you will be in the business like in 1 year, in 2 years. So the question is, how would you convince your business co-founder that you actually need to have this objective to optimize for maintainability?
Well, I think it's probably less that you have to convince like a non-technical co-founder, and more that you have to make the right selections of developers, and you have to manage it within the development organization. I've found it relatively easy to manage in the development organization if you make it clear in the job description, you make it clear when you're interviewing, and then you make it clear in code reviews. That's what you're doing. You can set good expectations, and then people generally will take it and work with it. I think, in terms of managing the non-technical side of the business, what you're trying to do is you have to manage their expectations and set reasonable expectations and develop reasonably for what the business needs and understand what that is. And so I've advised companies that have technical co-founders who are, the company has a certain amount of money and has to, deliver some feature, in order for them to think like their plan is like, if we get this feature at this point in time, or we get this piece of software out that does this, then we can sell this much, and this is the plan. And I've advised those companies where there's a technical co-founder saying, well, I know you want that feature in 3 months from now, but it's actually going to take, a year. Been in those meetings, and they're like, well, that doesn't work with our plan. And the technical co-founder is like, well, it's not possible. And at that point in time, either it's not possible, you do that investigation, or you need to find another technical co-founder. There are a lot of people in tech, and this goes with the arrogance that we were talking about earlier, that just don't think enough about what the business consequences are and what the business needs are, the organization's needs, and will just sort of live in this, well, this is the reality that I'm in, and so everyone else has to live in it. And that tends to turn out really badly. But I think that if you understand what your organization needs, you understand what you're optimizing for, you can set good expectations with your non-technical counterparts. And I don't think there'd be any reason why you'd have to have a pretty unreasonable CEO if the CEO is saying, well, I want you to optimize. I don't like optimizing for maintainability. I want you to optimize for like the delivery, like the lines of code, or I want you to optimize for like when I can get this thing out. I think what I would say is, when you can get that thing out is not counter to optimizing for maintainability. Optimizing for maintainability is about when a developer is trying to decide to do something or trying to architect something in a certain way. What we're asking is this going to require some really expensive esoteric skill set to work on, or can pretty much any developer work on it? I'd be really surprised if a CEO was like, that seems like a bad idea. It's a good idea.
Okay. So we have touched this already, and I really like your color regarding that the easiest systems to maintain are those that we do not build, run, maintain, but those that we actually pay somebody to build, to run, to maintain. But here we need to be very, very careful in the very beginning with our choices, what actually we would like, what would be our technical decisions, what would be the components of the system, and what would be your vendors. And my question is, what is your decision-making process to select the optimal vendor for different parts of the components? And maybe you can mention some of the examples that you have at Branch.
Sure. I think it's really important to have an appropriate third-party risk management process, which is you want to look at, what is the information security posture of the company, right? What are you going to share with it? And what's the uptime look like? And so there are companies, historically, in 2015, 2016, 2017, I used Auth0 a lot. That's a huge company. It's got, I think, it's owned by Okta now. But in my experience with it, it had quite poor uptime for being an authentication service. And so we stopped using it, and I haven't used it since. I've found it to be pretty unreliable. I think as an authentication service, you need to make sure that's definitely in the 5 nines category, because you just can't do anything if that's down. And so we use Cognito for that. AWS Cognito, people, not everybody loves Cognito, but it has phenomenal uptime, and it's very low latency as a service. So it accomplishes the main things it needs to, and I think they've done a lot of really good work with it recently. If I took some other examples, probably the most risky choice that we made was, I think about 2 years ago, we decided to go with Neon. Neon.tech is a serverless Postgres database. And we did this, we were using Aurora Serverless at AWS, but Aurora Serverless is not serverless. And it has all sorts of problems and can only be accessed through VPC. By the way, we don't run any VPC for any of our production infrastructure because we don't have any containers, we don't have any VMs. And so and there's one other note I'll make on this is, if you have to have a fixed IP for anything, there's a great service called QuotaGuard, quotaguard.com, which will give you an HTTP proxy with fixed IP addresses. So if you need that for a service, you don't need a VPC for that either. So we didn't want to be in a VPC. The VPC's got all sorts of problematic aspects with it when you're building this particular way. And so we looked at Neon, which was in private beta as a serverless Postgres instance. And we said, we're just going to run it in a test environment for 2 months. And we're just going to see, we're going to check the uptime. If the uptime's really good, and again, my philosophy here is, if you have a multi-tenant service, then and that's your only business, you're going to keep it up. If it goes down, you're going to bring it back up. But if what you have instead is you have these like virtual machines or containers where every client has their own virtual machine or their own container, then you're not going to care if one of those goes down. You're not monitoring those, especially if they go down for some reason, like they run out of space or whatever, or something weird happens with the application on them. So I felt pretty good we run this thing for 2 months, we feel good about it, and then we put it live. The other thing we did is we put a cache in front of it. So if it was unavailable, it would just be able to hit the cache for the content. And we had some failover there. And then we have really aggressive error reporting. So we use Slack, and there's so many channels that we have, but they're very finely tuned, a lot of noise taken out of them that are letting us know here's a problem. And so we know very quickly when something's wrong, and we build in alerts everywhere. We also use Datadog also alerting to Slack. Datadog is just a fantastic product for this sort of thing as well. And so with all of these streams of information and all of this alerting, we felt really good that this was a good choice. And Neon has been rock solid for us. And so that's the kind of thing I do, but we wouldn't pick, if we went to an organization and we were going to give it sensitive information, they didn't have a SOC 2, we wouldn't use them. If it was a brand new product, it was like 2 people and it was important for it to be up all the time, we wouldn't use it. Most of the services we use are companies that do make hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue and like have a lot of employees and, have SOC 2s and, they look pretty good. So, and certainly they've got better uptime than, even like Azure, VMs. So,
Yeah, so it looks like you have a really cherry-picked technical stack that allows you to be very, very efficient in the process. And speaking about the process, so we have touched architecture, we have touched teams structuring and autonomy, but what's the difference from this software development lifecycle? So what is the difference using serverless approach?
So I think our software development lifecycle is more influenced by our view on Agile, which is we come in peace every week to ship software, and every other week we do a retro, and there's no other process. So there are we're a little like Kanban in that there are a couple teams. The teams there's 1 PM per team. There are a number of different developers per team. The PM assigns work to the developers. Developer has a ticket, gets to work on it until it's done. Ideally, that's a couple days at most, ideally like a couple hours, maybe a couple days. We try to downscope that as much as we can. It goes to code review and they ask what's next. We have good automated testing, unit tests, integration tests, smoke tests, and end tests. So code review on everything and automated testing on everything, and then we try to deploy, once a day or so.
So do you think that? Do you think that this software development life cycle is different in fintech, and any specifics building the fintech software comparing to other industries that you have seen?
I think the only thing that is different is there is more compliance, and so the acceptance criteria for tickets may involve more people. In a more typical like B2B SaaS environment, I think your PM or your product owner can do your acceptance, like the core acceptance, and you're done. And I think there can be, significantly more acceptance. I also think that, anytime we need things written, like there's going to be some text somewhere that often has to have, some legal review. So there are those things. Now, those tend to happen before we create the ticket. We try to have the PM manage that work so that ticket created goes to developer and has all of that in there. But I just think of it that way. There's sort of a bit more in the specification, a bit more in the acceptance, but otherwise not different.
So you mentioned that you implemented the serverless principles actually from the very beginning when you started Branch, but there are lots of situations that you're already into some approach and you have a legacy software in place. So how would somebody in CTO role start using serverless principles if they already have lots of legacy software, lots of technical debt behind them?
The good news is people already do this to some extent. I mean, if you've used Twilio or Twilio Segment or Twilio SendGrid, those were independent, businesses before Twilio bought them. You're using managed services to do things. And most people don't, buy a bunch of machines and stick them in a data center to send text messages. So, imagine if what you're doing to send text messages instead of buying servers with telephony cards, but you're paying Twilio or some other service, you just need to do that. You can do that in so many more places than you are. And that's the essential strategy to this. In my book, I have several chapters on this. I start actually by talking about culture, because I think the biggest thing that will prevent an organization from being able to make changes in how they do things is that their culture is causing them to act in a certain way. And you can't just say, okay, let's do things a different way and then expect it to happen. You have to change the culture. And so you have to diagnose what is it in the culture like, here would be an example. I think that Algolia as a service, generally speaking, is a much better choice than Elasticsearch. But most companies, Elasticsearch has many more deploys, as far as I know, than Algolia. And by the way, Algolia can be very expensive in some cases. So if you have billions of records, don't use Algolia. But in most cases, there aren't billions of records. And so, we have millions of records in Algolia, and it's by far better. Elasticsearch has lots of reasons that it costs your organization so much more than Algolia if you really had a good total cost of ownership. So if you're using Elasticsearch and not Algolia, I think it's an interesting question to ask why. Why was that choice made? Why hasn't it changed? And like what would need to be different culturally in order for you to choose Algolia instead of Elasticsearch or make that switch? It's not that hard to switch either. It's just, you just get rid of a lot of stuff. So
it looks like more cultural approach rather than the technical approach. So the first, you need to start with changing the culture and having more supporters to use something new, some new approach, and then you will be able to change the technical parts.
Yes, and the hardest technical parts are the hardest technical parts about any rewrite or any large refactor. And so iterative replacement is the way to do this. And there are a lot of senior technical people who don't understand how to do iterative replacement. And so I think, basically iterative replacement involves something like a reverse proxy, something that sits in front of the application and can pick off different requests or routes to route to old system versus new system. And if you have that tool, then you can very easily just change small things over time. And so that, that's the major technical challenge, is just recognizing, I think the two biggest mistakes people make are they decide they're going to do a total rewrite and a knife edge cutover. You can't do it that way. You have to do it just small piece by small piece. And you have to ship all the time. I mean, if you're not shipping multiple times a week, new code, it might be behind a feature flag, but if you're not shipping new code multiple times a week, you're never going to get it. And then the other mistake that people make when they're trying to do a big refactor or change is that they usually make a celebration point of turning off the old machine. Okay. Don't do that. It's a bad milestone. You can leave that thing running forever. The old legacy system doesn't ever have to go off. You need to identify the scope of the business problem and solve the business problem. Usually the business problem is we try to implement some features or get some things going that take too long or we can't figure out how to do with the old system. That's the much better thing. Again, everybody wants to make software development this capital problem. Let's just do it all at once and then be done. And then then it'll cost us very little. Get rid of that. If you got to get rid of that in your head, you got to think, we're going to be spending money on this as long as it's a core product. And so let's just figure out what this next reasonable milestone is, and let's just ship all the time toward it.
Yeah, and here we also get back to the economics of the process, and this is always the decision-making point for any kind of big rewrites. So whether we will have and what kind of return on investment we will have with different approaches for rewriting or not. And Joe, one more question about if you are a technical co-founder and you consider to apply the serverless principles from the very beginning. So what would be my first steps?
And this is all greenfield development?
Yeah, greenfield development. So we're just starting. We don't have any kind of product. We need to initiate and set up all the design principles and processes and team. So everything green.
Yeah, I think you want to define this first milestone. And people talk about an MVP. I don't love that description. I think of it as like shoddiest viable product is better. Like, again, what you're trying to do is get something out there so you can learn more, which sometimes in fintech is not possible, right? Sometimes in fintechs, it's got to be, you can't get it to a customer, but you could have internal customers or internal feedback. So again, I still think you want to get something, get feedback, react to it. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to do that honestly with as little code as possible. So when we started and there was a question of, what are we gonna build for our underwriting system, like the ticket system, where underwriters get work and they work those tickets and take a look at, okay, what do we, we looked at the inspection of this house. Is this a house that will insure? And I just set up Zendesk. I was like, we're not building this. We're going to set up Zendesk. I think that kind of tactic is what you want to do and really narrow down on what do I actually have to build anything? If we will be happiest if at the very beginning, we are just writing glue code between APIs and software as a service vendors and building some interfaces in some way, that are giving us our view. The more, if we can have, 90% of our code be interfaces, we're in a good place. And then we'll get to a point where we'll realize what we really do need to build. Let me just give another story. So I was advising a company, and this was a company that, this was quite a few years ago, but it was a company that had a product around compliance, and they were trying to build another compliance product. And this is how the compliance product would work. Somebody would get a letter in the mail that would have a notice in it. Okay. And that notice would be and this person would be like a low-level employee in this company. And so they would want this notice to go. The goal was this notice goes into some system and they automatically deal with it. This would be an extra, like a third-party company that would deal with this particular compliance issue that was sent here. So it was not only we'll ingest this thing, but we'll reply to it and work with it. Okay. And so they were designing this system. And so it was like, we have this person, they're going to take a picture of it. They're going to email it, or they're going to upload it in an app or something to a site. And then we're going to recognize which form it is. It's one of like 300 forms. And then based on the form, we're going to go into a specific workflow that we have. And then we're going to fire off letters based upon what was in the form. And then we're going to like update a dashboard for it. Okay. That was like the general idea of what the product was. Okay. And they were 6 months in to building their automatic form detection code. And they had another team of people building the workflow rules. And so, and I was brought in because the people funding it were concerned that this was taking a long time, and they were worried, like, we don't even know if it's going to work. And it's like, it's quite expensive.
It's never ending process.
Never ending process. I had this meeting and I said, hey, I'm just curious. Can we just go around the table? Let me just tell you, I'm going to tell you it's 2 years from now, this thing failed. Why? Give me your top 1 or 2 reasons why this thing failed. We go around the room. Basically, everybody says, oh, well, the people won't, like, what'll fail because the people at the end won't actually take a good enough picture, or won't actually take the picture at all. They'll just like throw it away, or it won't get into the system. And I was like,
all right,
why don't you just set up a Gmail box and see if people will send you the picture? like why would you start with that? Right. So I think that but they were so excited because they got to build this like amazing thing and like use tech and like, recognize all these forms and like match them and stuff. But like, it didn't matter. And that product failed for exactly the reason that everybody in that room was worried about, which is people wouldn't take the pictures. So I think when you're building anything, I think resisting the urge to let me build cool things as a tech person, and instead let me understand what these problems are, and then have the humility to recognize that neither me nor my co-founder nor anyone knows exactly how to build this stuff. We're not close enough to the end users. And what we got to do is really rapidly get stuff out, get feedback and work on it. And I know I've given a long answer, but I'll give 2 recommendations. One of them is a book called Lean Customer Development by a woman named Cindy Alvarez. It's like the absolute best writing, and it's very short, on like how you run this process. The second thing is just an observation that getting to product market fit or getting to success in a startup is about the number of cycles you have. So I think, for any given product, it's like I need 50 cycles to have a product that someone's going to pay for. And when I mean a cycle, I mean I build something, I give it out to somebody, I get feedback, and I make a change. Okay, so I need 50 cycles. Some products might be 500 cycles. Okay. I should be optimizing my process for how many cycles I can do in like a month, right? Like I should be trying to do the fastest cycles I can. That's what I should be optimizing for. And so if I come up with a strategy as a technical co-founder to like build something amazing, but it's going to take me like a year, I'm going to spend an entire year and I won't even done one cycle. If I can find some interesting kind of hacky way to get some information out so that I can do a quick cycle, I should. And now some people say, well, wait, is this building for maintainability? And it is, because if you spend a year building something and it's wrong, you have embedded so many lines of your code that's a liability, that's not right, but you don't even have time to really fix them. But if all you did, if you went really iteratively, if you went really slow and you validated things like really rapidly, you won't have built bad stuff. And maybe you're using Zendesk for a while and you're like, okay, this can't be like a stupid front end on the Zendesk API. I'm going to have to like actually build a back end now. Fine, great. But now you know exactly what you need and you can go much faster and with much higher confidence.
Yeah. So really, if you can do the cycles very, very fast, it's obviously for all the startups, it's a crucial to move very fast and do the cycles really fast and test different kind of hypotheses of your product. So to wrap up our conversation, Joe, what do you think is the next big thing for the software development optimization? So what do you think are there any emerging trends that you see?
I mean, LLMs, generative AI. I mean, it's changing.
Is it obvious answer or?
I mean, I think that it's both it's both overhyped and underhyped.
Okay.
I've read things about it that I think are just patently can't be true. Like I don't think we'll stop writing SQL. I think it's sort of very silly to assume that people are going to be able to use natural language questions to like generate out, what needs to be SQL and then insights. I think there's a level of precision that needs to be put into those and a level of understanding in terms of what's coming out for that to actually be useful. So I don't think I think that's silly. But I think when it comes to building greenfield applications, and I think when it comes to how can a developer be really, really like way more efficient, I think we're just at the very beginning I mean, it's so powerful. I haven't spent nearly enough time, refining my skills in it. I don't spend that much time doing software development anymore, but when I do take some time and take a look at it and work with it, like we're in the Copilot chat thing. And so asking questions of Copilot chat. Copilot chat only works on a single source file at a time. There is a startup called Cody that will do it on your whole code base. That's pretty good. Those things are amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. And I would expect it completely revolutionizes application security. I think there's no question that application security should be fully automated. Like that testing, that entire space will be totally different in 5 years. I think that like fixing bugs, maybe it'll be really good at identifying some bugs, but I think there's still a lot. The idea that it would get rid of developers, I think, is silly because there's so much that it doesn't understand, right? And so it can help. But I think that we're going to reach a point where the output of one developer can be absolutely staggering, especially, I think we're going to start seeing companies where one developer can build and maintain just an application that 20 years ago or 10 years ago would have taken a team of 500. I think the productivity for developers.
I will agree with that. So my take on generative AI is more about the augmentation of what somebody can do. If we talk about the developers, so it's an augmentation, additional tool set that you can use to optimize your output. So as we have discussed, like different serverless principles. So yeah, I don't think that developers for sure will be replaced, but the productivity will be really improved. So Joe, I really thank you for this conversation, for all the insights, for unpacking your software development philosophy today. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Very happy to. It's been a great time.
Yes, and I encourage everybody who are actually watching this video to check the book, Serverless as a Game Changer. So we will have the link to Amazon and the description in the description to this video. And I really like the idea that using the serverless principles, you can actually build systems that are maintainable with less developers, with more average developers, which actually affects your hiring options, that you don't need to spend too much budget for hiring like very senior developers. For sure, you should have somebody on your core team, but it allows you to rely on more average developers or more junior developers and have a smaller team, more cross-functional team. And I really like these principles. And yeah, so thank you everybody for watching us today, and to all the fintech leaders and builders. So please like our video, please share this with your colleagues, and please leave all your comments below and all your questions below. And we're building the fintech community here. And this is how YouTube works. And I will really appreciate if you can share this with other fintech leaders and builders that you know. And it was me, Vasyl Solashuk from Insart, and Joe Emison from Branch. And let's keep building fintech together, serverless.
Still watching us and have not subscribed yet? Let's fix this. Also, don't forget to like this video and take a look at the other episodes we have. See ya!